It's that time again for the confluence of Oklahoma Memo and Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes, who's here in person.
In person. We can like physically touch each other. This is great.
In Oklahoma City. What brings you to Oklahoma City, man?
I've got friends down here, so I'm visiting kind of for the holidays and just to see them. They're about as close as family as I can get.
So it's not for football night in America?
No, but we will be watching the game. My wife, who was an OU cheerleader, is definitely watching for back in Detroit. So, yeah.
I thought about what Oklahoma stories could we talk about this week, and I couldn't really find. There are a couple of good ones, and I should note, for those of you who listen to all of these, I'll be talking to J.C. Holman on, I almost said J.C. Watts, Oklahoma football on the line. J.C. Holman on Monday about his stories in Oklahoma Watch with regard to Gentner Drummond and State Farm.
Yeah.
Big RICO case there. It's just developing now. But really, honestly, the biggest story in Oklahoma is Oklahoma football right now. And there have been so many things to happen nationally that I thought maybe we would try to make it make sense with Grant Hermes. Let's start with the Epstein files. Today is Friday, December the 19th. Have they been released yet?
So not yet, at least not as we're talking. This was the deadline that Congress set for when these files had to be released. So they only had 30 days, the DOJ, to redact all these files. The Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, went on Fox News this morning or late last night. I can't quite remember which show it was on. I think it's been on a couple times now. And basically said what the DOJ is going to do is release a couple 100,000 of these files. And they're like nearing, multiple hundreds of thousands of these files. And they're just going to release some of them right now, which is patently illegal. It is against what Congress passed. It is against the law they passed that the president signed. And so the question is now, when these get dropped, it won't be all of them, because the DOJ has said it won't be. What happens next? Congress adjourns for their holiday break for the next 2 weeks. Is anybody in Congress going to push back against this? There are some members, Democratic members, and then also quite a few Republicans who are saying, this isn't what we told you to do. You are not following the law. And in something like this, Congress can hold members of the executive branch in contempt. And that would be someone like Todd Blanche. That would be somebody like Pam Bondi, who has not had a very good week. Specifically surrounding the Epstein files. We can talk about the Susie Wiles stuff afterwards, but there are people here that could be held in real peril career-wise for not doing this, and could face actual jail time for this. Contempt of Congress is punishable by jail time.
And it is one of those situations where it would be punishable until they did what they were told to do.
Yes, definitely. And that could be a thing, but also it could just be that they get punished for not following the law in the first place, and then that sentence runs out, and then they get released or whatever. And it would be 30 days or 90 days, or it wouldn't be a long period of time. But the fact of the matter remains that the Department of Justice does not plan to follow the law, which is something that we have seen kind of consistently throughout this administration, usually when it came to judicial orders and certain things like immigration. This is something new. This is something the president said he wanted, signed off on, even though he clearly probably didn't want a lot of this stuff. But signed off on this. Members of Congress went around their own leader in Mike Johnson to get this law passed. And now the DOJ just isn't going to follow it. That's going to be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of the MAGA base, because not only is Epstein and the Epstein files a core piece of what they believe and what they talk about a lot, and what Trump talked about a lot, and J.D. Vance talked about a lot in the 2024 election, it's also the law and order presidency aspect of this that a lot of them voted for. So now you've got two different factions here who may disagree with what's going to be happening here, may be very unhappy about it for different reasons. And it actually is this is not to log roll early, but I have an interview out today with Alex Hinton, who's an anthropologist from Rutgers who studies MAGA as a cultural anthropological movement. And we talked all about the release of the Epstein files and what it would mean for MAGA. And in the end, whatever's in these files, it might not actually matter to a lot of the MAGA voters, a lot of those base voters, because they're going to figure out ways to support Donald Trump no matter what. But it is the people that are 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So those law and order voters. It will be some of the people who are skeptical about why these things weren't released when Pam Bondi said she had the files on her desk. This kind of a thing will just add to the peeling away of those people.
So for those of us, you and I, who have worked in the media, and I just pull back the curtain a little bit, Grant, wouldn't today, December the 19th, be a perfect day to release all the files? It's the week before a holiday week.
Yes.
It's Friday. We've talked about and tried to educate folks on what the Friday news dump is. If I were trying to imagine a perfect day to release them all, today would be it.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have members of Congress going home for the holidays. The president, I think, is already in Mar-a-Lago. If he's not by now, he will be this afternoon, likely for the holidays, because he announced all of his big stuff yesterday. You're going to have most media people already leaving for the holidays out of D.C., so D.C. itself kind of becomes a ghost town. This would be the time to do it. People aren't really going to make a lot of headlines between now and after Christmas. You do get this weird little week in between Christmas and New Year's where sometimes things happen, but often not. Mm-hmm. And so by the time everybody gets back up to speed, you're talking about into the second week of January. And at the pace that this administration moves and this news cycle moves, a lot of this stuff might fall by the wayside. Mm-hmm. And so instead of getting little drips, which we're going to get now, you could just do this all at once and steamroll major media outlets who have the people and time to do this or don't. Mm-hmm. And so they have to pick and choose who's going to do this thing. And you get a lot of this stuff that doesn't get out, that they might not want out. So it doesn't also make sense from that aspect either. You could just steamroll the press if you're the Trump administration, which they have been wont to do.
That would be a very Steve Bannon thing to do.
Yes, very flood the zone, which is his term, mm-hmm. and then just let people kind of have at it, and what falls through the cracks is going to fall through the cracks.
It also seems that today would have been a good day to release all of the Epstein files. And by the way, it's midday. It's quite possible that this happens by 3, 4, or 5. Sure. I mean, I think the thought is that it's not going to happen, but if it hadn't happened yet, but let's say, give them the benefit of the doubt and say you still have a little bit of time left. This could happen today. But this has been a week that has been so filled with national stories and talkers and analysis that, again, another reason why this would have been a perfect week. So let's start at the very, very beginning and how the week started. Yeah. I talked about football. Oklahoma football. It's football night in Oklahoma, if you don't know, Boomer Sooner. But it's the daughter of a very famous NFL play-by-play guy, Pat Summerall, Susie Wiles. A lot of folks didn't know that. She's the chief of staff. Really, if you watch The West Wing, the right-hand confidant of President Trump. She talked to a guy named Chris Whipple, who is sort of a chief of staff historian himself. We both own the book, The Gatekeepers, one of my favorite books of all time. She talked to him for Vanity Fair, and then all of a sudden, the secrets of the White House are pouring out, and it was kind of amazing. And Trump stood by her.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So what this was, it was two separate stories in Vanity Fair. Whipple was working for Vanity Fair. He talks to Susie Wiles and several other members of the administration, but mainly Susie Wiles over 11 months and 11 different interviews on the record, and likely many more on background and off the record. And let's back up too, because the chief of staff, yes, is the right-hand person of the president. In the West Wing, it's Leo McGarry, right? Yep. And what their job is to gatekeep for the president. The job of being president is the hardest job in the world. It is more and more complicated with every passing presidency. It is more and more complicated as the world is moving faster and there are more problems, and not every problem can reach the president. Mm-hmm. And so the chief of staff has top secret clearance for that, sometimes above top secret clearance for some of these things. They're involved in almost every single decision that happens within the White House that isn't made by the president physically. And she is about as close to Donald Trump as anybody is going to get in this White House and the way that he thinks. So to have these interviews with her is stunning in and of itself, because this is a White House that doesn't normally do that. And they certainly don't do it with not overly friendly outlets like Vanity Fair. Right. Vanity Fair is, in this case, a pretty neutral, if not a left-leaning outlet when it comes to politics. So it was stunning to see this stuff. But then she starts saying all these things about people in the administration. I mean, she actively says that Elon Musk is a known ketamine user and was using ketamine, or at least microdosing ketamine, while making decisions and public statements on behalf of the White House, mm-hmm. while he was working in the White House. She calls J.D. Vance a conspiracy theorist, which he's kind of this thing where he was like, I only believe the conspiracies that are true, which is not really how conspiracies work. It's not conspiracy if it's true. Which I think was his point, but it wasn't as clever as he thought it was. But also, the chief of staff calling the vice president a conspiracy theorist doesn't exactly mean great things for what you think about his decision-making abilities and your opinion of what he's thinking of. And then I think the really telling stuff was about the president. She said he had an alcoholic's personality, in which she sort of describes him as a dry drunk kind of a guy who, when he's really amped up on whatever he's thinking about. There's nothing that will stop him. Nothing she says. She basically describes him as a dude who is kind of out of the loop most of the time, and a White House that's in quite a bit of chaos at worst, but most of the time is pretty disorganized. And the interesting thing that I think about this is that in any other White House, this would be a scandal. Susie Wiles would have been shown the door immediately after this stuff happened. But Trump stands by her. And I think the really interesting thing is that they don't see this stuff as bad, but as bragging a little bit. Susie Wiles says these things. She's also not a stupid political actor. She is one of the better ones in the country, and is saying these things because she thinks they are net positives and not drawbacks, and people aren't going to see them as drawbacks. And it was a really stunning set of things. And then when you talk about Pam Bondi and the DOJ and the Epstein
Whiff and the
files,
miss.
yes,
Yeah.
she says Bondi whiffed on the Epstein files and saying that the files were on her desk and like all these things. And Wiles says she's read them and says that Trump is in them, which we all know, but isn't accused of doing anything or shown doing anything in these files. I guess we'll see whatever happens with that. But it was a really stunning piece of reporting from Chris Whipple.
So somebody mentioned to me, in fact, I visited this space right here a couple of days ago, and it may have been somebody in this room who had mentioned to me that they thought that essentially what Susie was saying was she was channeling the president, and it was a way for the president to get out some dirty laundry without saying it himself.
Sure. That's interesting to me too, that like it could have been that Wiles has sort of a little blessing from the president to say some of these things that he's been saying, to send a message to other members of the administration to sort of like lock it in a little bit. But again, it's over the course of 11 interviews in 11 months. So for that to be like a carte blanche thing to say is quite a thing for the president to do. It'd be one thing if this was 11 interviews that happened in the last 11 days. And when the president is sort of on rocky footing right now with approval ratings, with the economy, with voters in general about things like immigration or the Epstein files, and then he gets to express some frustration through her about this immediate stuff right now, which gets us to like his speech on Wednesday. But that wasn't what this was. And so you get little insights into the first year of this administration through these interviews, through Susie Wiles, at little points here and there when different things were happening. And the fact that this consistently disorganized approach to this was the thing that comes out of this interview, I think is really telling. The other thing that I think is telling too is that the chief of staff is supposed to also be the only person really to tell the president, you can't do that.
Right.
It's unconstitutional. It's politically inviolable. It's a bad optical look for you, or we can find a different solution to this thing. They're supposed to be a check on some of the worst wills of any president. And chiefs of staff have long talked about it.
And so like in West Wing, Leo and the president, they were friends. You have to have somebody you trust so much. Everybody's got that one person who calls you on your stuff.
Yeah.
That's what the chief of staff is.
I mean, the chiefs of staff for Barack Obama had different chiefs of staff had multiple conversations with Barack Obama about drone strikes in Yemen and in the Middle East. And Obama still went on to do those drone strikes, but pared back in some cases, or not at all in some cases, or ignored them in some cases, but those conversations were had. Susie Wiles, and I said J.D. Vance's quote is saying this, but Susie Wiles doesn't see herself as somebody who will do that for this president, and is somebody who is there to facilitate what he wants at any given moment, which is just not how we have traditionally seen chiefs of staff operate.
I think I think her quote was something to the effect of, well, when we have a tie, I lose.
Right, exactly. And that is kind of how chiefs of staff operate, but also not really. No one is supposed to lose in that conversation. It's supposed to be a check and balance on these things. And then the president makes a decision on these. That in and of itself in this presidency also is telling about where the administration is, because it also means that not everything is going through the president in a way that you would expect it to. And decisions are getting made based on how the president is feeling in that moment versus an overall policy goal or larger discussion.
As if maybe too many things are being gate kept from him.
Yes. That he does get to spend a lot of time doing the ballroom, doing the renovations to the Oval Office and the White House itself, handwriting the plaques that went up this week on the presidential walk.
It's something a king might do.
Yeah. And like delegate down then. And a lot of that, and Wiles sort of intimates of this, is falling on the shoulders of Stephen Miller frequently, who I think actually that's a good place to move out of the speech on Wednesday, because a lot of that speech felt like a speech that was written by and for Stephen Miller.
So let's stop right there and then move to the speech, because when a president decides that they want to address the nation, there is a process they have to go through. They have to ask for airtime, network time, and just, spoiler alert, it was a very short address, but it was very quick in his wording pace, and he was a little loud. The mics were peaking, which was very strange on a network broadcast. The mics were hot, as they would say. Explain to us, help us make it make sense. What goes into that process? Who do you ask? Do you call the president of CBS and say, I want some airtime? How does that work?
I mean, basically, yes. Like, the White House has to go to the presidents of the networks and the news directors of those networks to say, hey, we need to preempt whatever coverage you have from this time to this time. And there are then questions, because that means money is being taken out of the revenue streams for these networks. I mean, CBS preempted the season finale of Survivor. That is 5 million plus viewers. It's their most watched show, at least in that time slot. And that's a big ask to do that. And so generally you have to tell them what the speech is about. And then the network gets to decide we either are or aren't going to carry you. And right now there are a lot of complicating factors about what it would mean for a network to say no to this administration.
It might invite a suit or aggression of some kind,
or even some kind of Federal Communications Commission, FCC action or investigation into, let's say it's NBC or ABC who doesn't do this. It wasn't going to be CBS, but there's a difficult political balance for that right now too, but also they're not just going to air whatever the president wants. And so I would not be surprised, and this is speculation here, but if we don't learn over the weekend or sometime soon that what the White House told the networks that this speech was going to be about it was different than what they thought it was going to be.
We talked beforehand that perhaps it might have been he pitched a speech on Venezuela or something.
Something that sounded like it, right? So they said, well, what is the president going to be talking about? It's a pretty kind of out of the norm thing to need to do right now in this time of year. And it's a national, international security imperative. And
I'm thinking Seinfeld all of a sudden, import, export.
Yeah. It's an economic import thing that also has to do with oil and in the lots of roundabout ways, all of the things are contained what the president talked about. But that makes you think that what he actually is announcing is some sort of ground incursion into Venezuela, which he keeps promising is going to happen, and was kind of the only thing that seemed big enough to break into the networks like this. And instead, it turned out to be what was basically a campaign speech for the president trying to do a reset on what's happening right now.
And look back at the year. Can we talk about how not normal that speech actually was? Because we worked in local TV, and we've seen presidents over the years. That cadence was odd. It was way too fast. It was way too loud. It's just that wasn't normal.
So when I watched it, I thought maybe he was having trouble keeping up with the teleprompter. That the prompter was going too fast. But the cadence thing is, I think, more important to where the president's state of mind was. And it could have been, like you said, kind of rolling, that maybe the networks were like, hey, you're only going to get 20 minutes. We're not going to give you more than that. And so the president had what was probably more like a 25-minute address that he had to speed through a little bit. But also he's not somebody, if the prompter goes away from what he wants to do, he's not going to follow that prompter anymore. And so it felt like to me that actually the prompter might be keeping up with him. Right. So that he was pushing forward on this thing. It was the most amped up I've seen him in a long time. I mean, this Donald Trump versus the Donald Trump that's falling asleep during cabinet meetings these are different people. It reminded me of the Biden State of the Union, where all of a sudden Biden was out there and was really like energize.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wasn't that, I don't know if that was after it was the State of the Union.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me as if this might be the version of President Trump that hops on Truth Social at 1 a.m.
It did feel sort of like that. Like he was in this sort of like scramble thing a little bit. And it was really bizarre for those reasons. The substance of the speech itself was kind of neither here nor there.
Right.
It was all the same stuff that we have heard from the president. A lot of it didn't really ring true. I mean, there were certain things about some prices coming down, but like gas prices sub $2 are very specific. It was just thing he talked about are very specific places and like specific gas stations.
It's not California.
It's not California. It's some places in Colorado, some places in South Dakota. But like when you look at gas prices overall, they're kind of not down by all that much. Oil prices are also down. And it's also worth saying, too, that in a lot of these price things, they do fall on the president's shoulders and then they hit his desk. But any president doesn't really have a lot of control over things like specifically oil prices, but a lot of these price things. And so it's a weird thing for a president to like try to claim that they did. Although I will say a lot of the price things we're seeing lately have to do with the tariffs. And there are certain things here that the president is also trying to win voters back on. And yes, it's the economy by trying to tell people that your life is more affordable, even though people right now don't feel like it is.
Right.
They're buying fewer Christmas presents. Thanksgivings were smaller. Turkeys were smaller. Yes, the president and the White House is saying that those things are cheaper, but people are buying less.
Right.
And then there's a split between most of the purchasing power that's being made up is actually people who are in the top like 5% of Americans are doing most of the buying right now. And so when you take the average of those things, it looks like people are spending more money, or there was like a record Black Friday or Cyber Monday, and it just kind of wasn't. So the president is trying to do that. On immigration, I think some of those things were really interesting. It was very mid-2000s to early 2010s stuff about like immigrants taking jobs. And a specific number that I thought the president honed in on, which was odd, was the like job growth for American-born citizens. And that was interesting because that's not normally a way that we calculate jobs. That's its own separate thing. And for that to be a focus is also a signal about immigration and where the White House is on that. The really only the piece of new news was this promise to send 1.5 million, let's say, service members these checks for $1,776, $1,776 for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I wrote a piece about this yesterday, and then by the time that it had gone out, some new reporting had happened. But like the math doesn't quite work on where this money is coming from. It's supposedly being taken out of the housing budget that was put into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So this is one similar to what happened during COVID, where we had those COVID checks that actually came from Congress, that Congress let the president put his signature on. This is a similar version of that. It's unclear if these checks can be used for this, if this money can be, because if they're just moving housing money around and using it for something else, that might be illegal because it's not what Congress allotted it for. If they're just taking this money and saying it's a different thing and it's just rebranding this money, which is on brand for this presidency, which we've seen a lot with the Kennedy Center this week, with DOGE, with Department of War. Those things legally on paper are still not called those things. Mm-hmm. Like if it's that, then it's sort of this kind of cynical bait and switch. And it made it seem like these service members were getting money that they wouldn't have otherwise been getting when they would have been otherwise getting this money. And they just wouldn't have known. It's also unclear if people who need this money for like housing stipends are like going to not get that money for housing now, if this money is for something else. It also doesn't cover every service member. It's just some active duty members. It doesn't cover National Guard members or reservists. So there's a lot to have to unpack here.
Right.
And it comes on the eve of also today, we are expecting a ruling from the Supreme Court about the tariffs. And so the president is kind of trying to use this speech and the promise of some of this money in the way that he's done with other dividends, is what he calls them, to strong-arm the Supreme Court to let him continue using the tariffs because he may have done those illegally as well.
So it's Friday, and it is about 12:51 Central Time. When does the Supreme Court go home for the day?
They'll probably leave around 4.
Around
so
4.
We'll get the shots of all of the news interns running They get the briefs and then run back to the cameras.
A rare Friday news dump from SCOTUS. Usually you get a little a heads up and maybe something from SCOTUS blog or whoever's covering the Supreme Court. There was a lot in that speech, and to be fair, presidents often try to pack a lot in. Just if I were advising him, not that he was asking me, it would have been a great opportunity to encourage people we're going to hear about retail numbers one way or the other. There was a story at KJRH in Tulsa where some Tulsa local retailers are saying, look, man, sales are down 40, 50% right now. It's not good.
Yeah. There was an opportunity here for the president to, instead of what he did was eschew blame onto the Biden administration, which is what he led with.
He said, good night, good evening, America. I inherited a mess.
Yes. It was immediately hello, none of this is my fault. And which is his MO, to eschew blame on somebody else. But it could have been a moment for him to say, listen, I know things don't feel great, but here are the numbers on this. And what we need is for Americans to be patriotic and buy things and help support the economy through this thing, which is a tough sell, but he could have been somebody who was going to be a leader in that moment. And this is a refrain, something that I've talked about frequently and written about, is that in these moments in which Donald Trump, the man and the president, could step up to be a frontward-facing leader, chooses to be somebody who looks backwards and blames the other things and other people for how we got here, and that he's just a victim of circumstance. He did it with COVID. He did it with natural disasters, the wildfires, when he was president. And then he did it again when he wasn't president, but talked about blocking aid for California. This is a thing that he does.
Right.
And he kind of did it the week when we talked with Pete Hegseth, where he kind of was well, I don't know anything about these boat strikes. And
right.
This is just what he does.
So I already have a vision in my head, Grant. 20 years from now, when the Broadway musical debuts called The Trump Years or just Trump, it's just going to be one actor comes out dressed as Donald Trump and says, hello, none of this is my fault. And then we're into the first number. Yeah. Yeah. So
absolutely.
The day after that speech, the morning after that speech, all of a sudden, President Trump is into action. He's talking to the press. He's answering questions. He's renaming the Kennedy Center, and he's reclassifying marijuana to be Schedule 3. What impact is that going to have? And was that a surprise?
So it was a surprise. Let's start with marijuana. And actually it has a great Oklahoma tie because of the way that Oklahoma's medical marijuana industry is set up, which is to say it's not very well set up. It is literally the Wild West of marijuana. And that's kind of what's going to happen at a federal level now here. So if you're looking to places, it's not going to be California, Colorado that are going to be how this works. It's going to be Oklahoma. That's a good place to look at how law enforcement handles degrading or downgrading, I should say, of marijuana and declassification, some of those things. So what this is marijuana used to be a Schedule 1 narcotic, which is on the same level as meth and heroin and fentanyl. And it's now a Schedule 3, which is much closer to prescription opioids and ketamine, which is kind of an opioid, but it doesn't really matter. So what it means is that the DOJ, the DEA, the FBI, they need to treat weed as a low priority. And the penalties for it aren't as steep. That doesn't mean it's decriminalized. That can only happen through an act of Congress to change the Controlled Substances Act. And this is a thing that people have wanted for a long time. It's a popular policy with Americans across the country. It is unexpected because this is not a thing the president has said that he wants to fight for. It is not a popular thing among conservatives in the country. I think it was something along the lines of 38 to 45 Republicans in the Senate and the House sent a letter to the president saying, don't do this. The Catholic League said, don't do this. It was a big push to prevent him from doing this, but it's popular.
Right.
And he needs a boost right now. This might give him a little bump above 40% popularity, which he needs. So that was strange and unexpected, and it bucks a long trend in the Republican Party. We'll see what happens with that. It will create sort of a law enforcement mess for a little while, though. States have to re-scramble how to do this thing. The next thing would be people who are serving time for Schedule 1 narcotics possession, and it's marijuana. What happens to their sentences now? In a lot of states where these crimes have been decriminalized, Like, for instance, in Michigan, they reduce a lot of sentences because it doesn't seem fair that a crime that was a higher crime.
Why wouldn't they just release them?
I mean, they totally could. I mean, technically it's still Schedule 3, so like there is penalties associated with that. But like none of that seems to have been directed in this executive order to the Bureau of Prisons to start looking at these cases. And that might need to happen. You're going to start to get, again, law and order people being like, hey, what's the deal here? And that could be on the horizon. I doubt it. But we'll see. The president has been pretty quick with a pardon pen. So he might just do that. And that would be a wild change to law enforcement policy.
Right. And actually, I think would be wildly popular.
Wildly popular. Absolutely. And he could do it. But we'll see what he actually does here. That felt more to me like a thing that was some positive news after not such a great week for the administration. Right. You get the Kennedy Center renaming thing, which is a thing that Trump has said he wants to do, which, again, can't be done without congressional
Do you agree that this is completely temporary, that as soon as another president, as long as it's not J.D. Vance, is elected, that's done?
I don't know. So I'm assuming that if, let's say, a Democrat gets elected after Donald Trump, or Congress is overtaken by Democrats, right? They win back the Senate and the House, which is unlikely, but like, let's say they do. Maybe, but it could also feel small to them to do these things. They might not care. They might say like, hey, is the Republican revolt over removing Trump's name from the Kennedy Center going to be worth the price of that when we need to undo, let's say, green card program pauses, or we need Republican votes to bring asylum back, or those kinds of things. Maybe. I don't think all those things are going to stay, but also like the ballroom is going to have to get built. The White House said this week that it's now a matter of national security, that the foundation of the East Wing isn't exposed. Right. So that has to get done.
I get that.
I get that too.
Yeah.
I get that too. And then Trump wants to build this arch on the National Mall, and so the Democrats could also say
with the monument.
Yeah,
you already have the monument. So would the arch be like the St. Louis Arch?
No, like the Arch de Triomphe, like in
The Arc de Triomphe. I was just in Paris this summer. That's massive.
Huge. It's huge, and like they're called victory arcs, and like they were very popular with a very specific set of Germans in the middle of the 1900s. Yeah, and like, which actually kind of gets us to the second thing. Like Trump is talking about the arch, and then he announces these Patriot Games for the 250th.
I heard about America. It's a boy and a girl from each state, and they have to fight for food.
Right. They have to volunteer for tribute.
Yes,
which is like the joke that like it's like a Hunger Games thing, and like as an idea, like okay, like sure, we're just going to come off the Olympics
like
this year.
Pass and kick.
Yeah, I don't know what it'll be. Right, like fast pitch, home run derby stuff. I have no idea. There's also going to be a state fair on the National Mall, which I dig. I think that's a very fun idea. Every state's going to have like a booth or like a little whatever.
Love it.
Your thing. Very fun.
Yeah.
But the Patriot Games thing also has kind of sinister roots. There is a very famous thing, that if I can remember the name of it in German, is the Hallensportfest, which was a propaganda tournament in this same style of Patriot Games that was done by the Nazis in 1943 Netherlands when they were under Nazi control. And so like this, it doesn't feel great, this thing. And it came out of the blue and it seems odd. And like, I think maybe if we didn't have an administration that was kind of constantly flirting with these ideas and flirting with these ideas of grandeur that hearken to some of these things, it would feel less weird. But also I still think the idea is kind of odd. We're going to come off the Winter Olympics this year too. So like we will have, America's best athletes competing in these things. And like, I don't know.
Right. It's, it's with all the free TV that's available on, Pluto, Plex, this and that.
Right.
There'll be air for it somewhere.
Right.
But I just don't see this being popular in a year where we're going to be oversaturated with all else.
No, yeah, I don't think so either. I think it's going to feel underwhelming. I think there's going to be a big buildup and then it'll air on like Fox Nation or maybe CBS.
Right.
And
maybe CBS.
It might be CBS.
I don't know, man. I watched just a wee bit back of the Barry White's Erica Kirk interview, and I was like, that wood paneling, man. I don't know. It's and now she's going to talk to J.D. Vance.
I know. That'll be a more interesting interview, I think. only because like it's not that what Eric Kirk had to say wasn't important for what's happening in.
It's just that she's not the vice president.
She's not the vice president, and the heir apparent to this current movement in this White House.
Although I hear she endorsed him today for 2028 already.
Erica Kirk?
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, unsurprising.
Yeah. But why now? It's just
like, again, I don't have any inside line on this, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if Eric Kirk lines herself up to run for office in some kind of way. Whether it's, I don't think.
Oh, even in 2026.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't think it's like on a ticket maybe in 2028. That seems like a big jump for her, but more like she gets into a race somewhere.
So there has been this thing after the speech on Drudge. You see the headlines that a lot of MAGA was not enamored of the president's speech. And there have been a lot of headlines about this internal MAGA war. I mean, you have your Fuentes, Nick Fuentes, your Candace Owens, and not everybody is seeing on the same page here. Perhaps Erica was firing her shot into the bow of saying, I'm aligned with this guy.
I think so. And it was very much an interview aimed at people who were Turning Point USA people, whether they were members, they were followers or whatever, which was the organization her husband started, which she is now in charge of. Basically to say, we're still political players and have political importance in this administration and in the overall conservative movement. Don't go anywhere. And I think that's what a lot of that has been about. And her media tour has been about. Not just about the death of her husband, the terrible tragedy that it was, and the rise of political violence and hate speech against political violence.
It's been a terrible week.
Yes, it absolutely has. Yeah. It absolutely has. With the shooting in Australia, absolutely, and then whatever is the motive, which we're never really going to know, behind the shooter at Brown, and who is also accused of shooting that MIT professor as well. So. Yeah, it's not been a great week for that either. So there are lots of conversations happening about those things right now. And it was interesting to me that the president didn't mention some of those things in his speech either.
Right.
But also the pace of that speech, the tone of it, in the ways that we were talking about, just didn't leave room for that.
I just got the sense he didn't want to do it.
It felt weird. It felt like that. And it felt like he was mad about having to do it and then was therefore kind of mad at us for watching.
But, yeah, right. Like, why are you yelling at me, President?
Yeah.
I'm just a watcher. I'm but a watcher. But somebody mad with the thought of, why should I have to do this? Why don't you understand everything that I've done?
Which he did sort of do on True Social the week before. Like last week, he said, I think on Friday or Saturday, like, when will the people in the polls reflect how good we're doing? And he's upset that we don't buy into the narrative that they're putting out there. And it's because, ironically, the same thing that happened to Joe Biden is that people go to the store, they go to buy things, like I talked about a little earlier, and they're not seeing those prices go down. They're not feeling richer in maybe any sense of the word right now. And that actually is one of the things that I thought was the most telling of the Susie Wiles interviews, which I think is a good kind of thing for the entire week in this presidency, is that they are isolated from the rest of the country. They are very much kind of high on their own supply and believe wholeheartedly in these things, which you have to do in any administration. That's not unique to this one. But they're not being moved or buoyed by anything external. It is all this bubble they've created. And that was pretty clear. The president's frustration with poll numbers is clear about that. Susie Wiles not kind of seeing what she was saying is going to come back to bite the administration is indicative of that bubble. And I think you get a lot of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the little time that I did in corporate communications, actually, I don't know if you remember this, very first time I met you, I was a corporate communications manager at Love's, and you did a story.
I did.
It was at a school. It was you and Andy.
Yeah.
So I remember my boss, Kyla, she was like, and Jenny also, people's feelings are valid. No matter whether the complaint really, if we know behind the scenes, is invalid, how they feel about it is valid. And it's not just the prices they see at the store. It's a job market. If they've been laid off and they're struggling to even get, keep from being ghosted by a prospective employer, it's all of that. It's just the sense of malaise. If you remember Jimmy Carter and his malaise speech, which really doomed his presidency, because you can't acknowledge that in a way that just sort of says it is what it is, I guess. But it's all of these things that come together,
right?
And really, it is It is a device of the president's communications team, or a failure of that communications team to, I don't know that you could spin the unspinnable. Like, if things are what they are, that is what it is.
Right.
But clearly something in the communication isn't working either.
I agree. And like, there are moments in presidential history that you got Jimmy Carter's malaise speech in which, he tries to make a common sense argument or a commonality argument with people being like, I understand that none of us feel great right now. And then kind of doesn't go on to scold Americans, but just kind of commiserates in a way that like didn't feel like leadership. Donald Trump does this thing where he is scolding Americans for not getting with the program and not buying into what the White House is selling. And I think the best example of how to sort of unspin the unspinnable is Bill Clinton's "I feel your pain" speech. And that is a real pivotal moment for him and kind of put him, in the stratosphere of presidential communications, because it was a thing that was like, I know you feel bad. I feel your pain, and we are doing everything we can to make this better. Here's how. And like, if Trump got in front of the microphone, in front of the cameras, and did that, that is a much better version of what he was trying to do. You can still have all the slides you want, all the numbers up there can stay the same, founded or not founded or whatever. But coming from the standpoint that he says, I understand that things feel bad. I inherited a mess and it still feels bad. And we are working. It would help if he hadn't promised to fix prices on day one, but he could do that.
And if President Trump did that, being so out of character for him to sort of like publicly show sympathy or empathy, look, he's a very Mr. Burns character.
Yes.
But if he were to do that, it would be wildly effective because it would be out of the blue. You're like, oh, he is getting it.
Well, because the bar is so low when it comes to where Trump himself, but also this White House, needs to meet when it comes to like empathy and sympathy and those things, because it's not their MO. It's not how they approach any kind of communication at all. And so if he cleared a low hurdle like that, it would be a big thing. And it would be like, oh, is he turning the corner into a presidency? Is the year of retribution over? And now we're in this thing. And that's just not the direction they're taking.
Mm-hmm. So, we're in a different location right here. My buddy Scott Mitchell is going to be hosting a lot of podcasts here in the future. My understanding is that this might be the very first podcast in this location.
All right.
So we've broken it in. Tell us about what's going on, though, to segue back to make it make sense before we wrap up. What's going on the blog with the videos this week? Who are you talking to? And do you have anything lined up for Christmas week?
So I've got Alex Hinton on the show today that drops a little after we're done recording here. He is the anthropologist from Rutgers who talks about what the Epstein files may or may not do to the MAGA movement from like a cultural standpoint, which is a fascinating conversation. We actually talked just before Thanksgiving, but I held it until this week when these files drop. So you're going to hear some stuff that feels a little old, but it's still all applies. And actually, with a little bit of hindsight from us now, I felt it actually enriched that conversation a little more. This week, I also talked about those 1776 checks, in which how the numbers for that don't exactly work. And then the things you forgot from civics class this week was one that I had been meaning to do.
Birthright citizenship.
Yes. Who gets to be a citizen?
Yeah.
How does that work? There are multiple ways it works, but the two big ways are birthright citizenship and naturalization. And we got a headline this week about naturalized citizens and the Department of Justice going after people who've been naturalized because they might have done it improperly. There are ways that you can unbecome a citizen. They only really apply to people who are naturalized. But the idea of birthright citizenship is older than the White House is making it out to be. It's older than the founding of America. And becoming a citizen and unbecoming a citizen are both harder than you think. I took the citizenship test and you have to get 12 out of 20 right on this thing now, which is harder than it used to be. And I only got 18. And I was kind of surprised. Yeah. So it was really fun to write this.
Well, and what I appreciated about your post there was that you delineated really all of the situations in which somebody could. It's very specific on how you could lose your citizenship once you have it if you were naturalized.
Yes.
And the naturalization test. It's been a while. I think I took a version of that and got all of them right. I would also tell you, Grant, I was 42 when I was 4. And I was reading about presidents and whatnot, but I'm going to take it again and see, do you have a link in there?
There's a link in the newsletter this week,
right,
too.
so
yeah.
Make sure that that's all there. And I'm talking to J.C. Hallman on Monday about his set of stories in Oklahoma Watch. about what's happening with State Farm. Essentially, there's a Broken Arrow family. They weren't able to get the hail damage in their roof fixed, and it turns out there are hundreds of cases like this, and the accusation being that State Farm is pre-denying the damage there. Gunnar Drummond's going after him, and he's really looking toward a case that happened in Illinois back in 2018 as the foundation for what he's planning to do. And I'm going to talk to JC and see what might happen there. So that'll be some good stuff for Christmas.
Attorneys general have tried to do that in the state of Oklahoma before and have not been overly successful. So I'm really curious to see what Drummond is going to do.
Right. And let's say he becomes governor. He won't be attorney general at that point.
Right.
Will the next attorney general be willing to carry that water? Because the case in St. Louis, and I don't want to just spoil the story totally, but it didn't go through because a judge got elected who was the deciding vote. And it turned out he may have gotten a little bit of money from the insurance company, which is why this all kind of falls under RICO.
I'm excited to listen to this story because it's such a fascinating piece. Yeah.
You got big Christmas plans?
Nothing big. Low key for us this year. I'm going to cook a bunch like I normally do. We live separate from our families, so we're going to do the Zoom thing. And then I'm going to do some best ofs this week and maybe take a week off a little bit.
Well, last year we went to North Carolina and visited relatives. This year we're staying here. I'm hoping that the Sooners are playing Indiana next weekend.
Fingers crossed.
All right, fingers crossed, man. It's been great talking to you.
too.
Dude, great seeing you, man. It's awesome. Thank you all for watching. If you are not subscribed yet to Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes, I'm going to have all the links there. I try to include them in everything I do, the verticals, the horizontals, the gamut, to all the things. And if you're not a subscriber yet to Oklahoma Memo, it's real simple. oklahomamemo.com/subscribe. It comes out 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. The Saturday edition is where you'll find this conversation. For Grant, I'm Ryan. We'll talk to you next time.